Good day, one and all. I have a very cool thrift store find to show you today, and today's video is being filmed from my old bedroom at my mother's house. I've been vacationing here for a couple of weeks. But let me remove the cover from this and show you what it is. And there it is. It's a Smith Corona model CXL 4200 electric typewriter. And this was made in 1988. I bought this for $3 at a thrift store in the United States, which I think is a really good deal, because this thing works absolutely perfect, and as you can see, it is in very beautiful shape. Nothing wrong with this. Actually, there is just one minor imperfection, but it doesn't affect the functionality at all. This key has a little green LED that's supposed to light up, and it does not. That LED doesn't work, and it's actually a common problem among Smith Corona's electric typewriters and word processors. I would like to assume that everybody watching this knows what a typewriter is, but I would not be too surprised if it turns out that among my younger viewers there are some who might not know what a typewriter is. A typewriter is what people used basically before computers became affordable and viable for typing stuff. So what you did was you took a piece of paper and you shoved it in there and it came out the other side, and when you pressed keys, a little mechanical hammer punched the paper, punched an ink ribbon into the paper into the shape of the letter you typed, and the letter would be printed on the page. They're very noisy, they're very cool. Typewriters of the original variety are not electric, they're all mechanical. Pressing the key actuates a lever that makes the appropriate hammer come up and punch the page. But this is an electric typewriter, which came about in the 1970s and were the main type of typewriter being sold from the 1980s onward. An electric typewriter, it's all electrical. So when you press a key, this keyboard is for all intents and purposes just a computer keyboard. It's all electronic, and when you press a key, there's a circuitry that makes the correct letter be punched on the page, and the action of punching the page is done by an electric solenoid. Now, what's extra cool about this thing is that it did come with the original documentation. Take a look at that. They gave you the warranty card, and I believe this card also has blanks where you can fill out any accessories that you wanted to order, and apparently they were interested to know what brand of typewriter that this one that you just bought was replacing, which I think is kind of hilarious. So they gave you that, and this thing hasn't been filled out. They gave you, I have the envelope that you're supposed to mail it in, and that hasn't been touched. And of course, the original owner's manual. So I think I got a pretty sweet deal, $3. And you know what's hilarious? There was another Smith Corona electric typewriter there, a slightly different model. It was an SL 470, without the documentation, dirty, and not in quite as good shape as this. It had a $10 price tag on it. This thing had no price tag on it, so when I brought it up to the register to ask how much it was, I almost laughed when the guy said $3. I'm like, alright, friggin' can't argue with that. So yeah, really excited to have this. I've always liked typewriters. My grandmother had a Smith Corona Classic 12. That's a mechanical typewriter from the 60s. She got it new as a gift, I guess, and used it for a while, eventually stopped using it when she got her first computer. Thing was still in perfect shape when I discovered it about 10 years ago. I was going through a closet at my grandparents' house, and I found it, and it was in a briefcase. Of course, back then they sold them with these nice briefcases that you could store them in. Open it up, and it's a typewriter, and my grandmother invited me to try it out, and I tried it out, and friggin' worked just fine. Really nice shape and really cool old school mechanical typewriter. It was such an experience to use it. And actually I have a little scrapbook that I've been keeping since 2004 or 5, and in that scrapbook I have a piece of paper that I typed a little sentence on with that typewriter. So it's in my scrapbook, and I think that's really cool. So I always liked typewriters, so this thing was definitely a very exciting find. Now, this thing was made in 1988, and that was not only well into the era when typewriters were beginning to be replaced by computers for word processing applications, but it was also when Smith Corona themselves were in big financial trouble. They were on their way to bankruptcy, actually, and they committed bankruptcy in 1995. Of course, Smith Corona is one of the biggest names for typewriters, here in North America at least. Started in the 1870s, I think, really became popular after World War II, all the way through to the 70s, and then once the personal computer started to become affordable in the 80s, obviously typewriters started falling out of favor. Smith Corona started getting into trouble. They came out with electric ones like this that do have, which this one does have, they do have some intelligent electronic features, which I'll be demonstrating. They tried to do that. They basically tried to compete with the personal computer market, introduce some fancy electronic features, and they also came out with word processors. A word processor, not the program, but an actual device, an actual appliance that you would buy. A word processor is like an electric typewriter, but it has a digital display on it, and whatever you type gets input into that display, and you can make edits to it before it prints onto the paper. So you can type a sentence, check it, confirm it's what you want to print, hit a button, and then it prints that sentence onto the paper. Some really fancy word processors would have a floppy disk drive on them. Smith Corona made a number of them, as well as other companies. They had a floppy disk drive on them. You could stick in a 720K floppy disk, save, write your documents entirely into memory, save it to a disk, recall it later, and you could write the whole thing electronically if you wanted, and then when you were ready to print it, you could print the whole thing at once on the printer part, just like printing it out on a computer. And of course, because it was a typewriter, at least electric typewriters and word processors, use basically a daisy wheel printer. So it's a little round wheel. I'll show you later. It's a little round wheel, and each pedal of the wheel has a character onto it. All the letters, all the numbers, and all the other characters. So because it's a daisy wheel printer, obviously those word processors were pretty slow to print. But yeah, pretty cool machines. But yeah, this thing was made in an era when Smith Corona was getting into trouble, trying to keep competitive by introducing more advanced typewriters and word processors, and it didn't work out very well. And they eventually went bankrupt in 1995. Didn't disappear though. They stayed a company. I think they shifted hands to a couple of holding companies, and after 1995 they no longer manufactured word processors. However, I think they continued to manufacture accessories for their word processors, consumables like the ribbons, correction ribbon, which I'll be talking about later, stuff like that. They kept manufacturing the consumable parts for their typewriters and word processors, and they did that for a long time, maybe into the 2000s, I'm not sure. They still exist today. They now manufacture, I think, thermal printing paper and other thermal printing equipment, so more of a commercial market, point of sale system, stuff like that. So they are still around, but no longer the company they used to be, that's for sure. So on to this typewriter, and you know what's kind of funny, or something kind of confusing, is from all the research I've done since getting this thing, Smith Corona seems, especially in the 70s and 80s, they had like multiple lines of typewriters that were all basically the same. Like, this one's called the CXL 4200. There were a few models in the CXL series, but there was also the XL series, and the SL series, and the Wordsmith series, and a couple other series, and they were all the same. Like that other typewriter I talked about in the thrift store where I found this one, it was called an SL 470, almost identical to this. The only difference was it had an extra feature it had an extra pitch option, and had a couple of extra automation options. Otherwise, it was identical to this one. And when you look at like pictures of Smith Corona's electric typewriters, you see all these different models and they all literally look identical. The biggest variation I find is basically the number of electronic options that they offer, the pitch size, automation options, and you know, just minor stuff like that. There's not any major differentiations from one line to another. Is the CXL better than the XL? Is it better than the SL? There just doesn't seem to be any difference. So I think what might not have helped Smith Corona's decline in the 80s is that they had an extremely bloated line of typewriters that did not have many differences from each other at all. It's just kind of nuts, and it seems they were like that with the last of their mechanical typewriters too. All these different lines of mechanical typewriters that all appeared to be the same, to me anyway. And if somebody who knows more about these things than I do knows why that might be, maybe there are some significant differences and I don't know what I'm talking about, please let me know, because I'd certainly like to know. But to me, Smith Corona in the 70s and 80s almost seems like Apple was in the early to mid 90s. Apple in the early to mid 90s having all these different Macintosh models that did not have very many differences between them. They had a bloated lineup of literally dozens of models, and it was eventually what almost drove them to bankruptcy. So let's take a look around this thing. Of course, you have the keyboard, and it's kind of spongy, but it does have a very slight mechanical springy noise to it when you type, which is kind of nice. It's an okay keyboard. It's not great, but it's not bad either. And you can see, so this button code is like a function button, so when you press code and a button that has blue print on it, or the number keys here, which correspond to this line of functions, it'll perform that function. This is a United States model, but it does have some special characters that you could type. Some accents, square brackets. That's the power switch. And of course it plugs into 120 volt power. So I'm going to be getting into some terms that if you're not familiar with typewriters, you might not know what those terms mean or what the features they refer to do. So I'll try and do my best to explain everything here. So when you want to type on a piece of paper, here's a scrap piece of paper which I'll write on the other side. So, well, first we'll turn it on, and when I turn it on it'll do a little self-test. Actually, I'll open this. This is called the paper bail. So your paper gets wedged between here and the bail, and that just helps keep it upright so you can see what you're doing. So I'll just release the paper bail, and I'll turn it on here, and that's the carriage, just like a computer printer. That's what houses the ink ribbon and the correction ribbon and the hammer and daisy wheel that prints the letters onto the paper. So I'll flip the power switch here, and it's ready to go. So I'm going to stick my piece of paper in the side I want to type on facing away from me. So a little guide right there to tell you where the left edge of the paper should be. And actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to release this first. This is a release that just makes the paper slide in easier. There's no really two-handed job, but I'll do the best I can here. Put that back, and then this knob here turns this round drum or cylinder right here that's called the platen, and that's what sort of keeps the page in place so that the hammer can strike it. So I can turn the knob here. You can see it starts to come up. I'll release the bail, put it up a little, put the bail back, and it's a little bit crooked, so I'm going to release it again and straighten it up a little bit, and we're ready to go. Now what's kind of cool is, although you can turn the knob to advance the paper or retract the paper, you can also do it electrically. If I hit the return key, it advances the paper by one line. If I hold it down, it does it continuously. And these two functions right here, index up and down, they do the same thing. The difference is that if I press the spacebar here to move the carriage to the middle of the page, so now the carriage is in the middle of the page, when I hit return, it'll return to the left margin. But if I want to leave the carriage in the same place and move the paper up and down by a line, I can press code and up or down. So code down advances the paper and it keeps the carriage in the same place. I can hold it, and that also works. Or code up retracts the paper. So that's how that works. Hit return. And once you turn the thing on and once it completes its self-test, it's ready to begin typing. I can type stuff, and I'll advance it here. And you can see we have type stuff. Very, very cool. And yeah, you just type and that's how you friggin' use a typewriter. And because this thing does have electronic memory in it, you can type faster than what it can print, and up to a limit. You know, it can buffer your keystrokes up to a certain limit, so you don't go too fast and miss anything. So another function you have is you have two different pitch options. So pitch is not the size of the font, but it's the spacing between letters in a word. So if I just type a few X's here, it defaults, when you turn it on, it defaults to pitch 10. So if I just type a bunch of X's, and I will now switch to pitch 12, hit code 12, and it beeps to let you know when a function's been activated. Type a few X's again, and you can see they are now closer together. So that's just a nice little preference that you can set there. Set it back to 10. And you can also set the line space. So if I type something again, let's try it again. There. So that's line space 1, which is what it defaults to. So now if I hit code line space 1.5, and then hit return, it advances by 1.5 line space. And you can see there's more space between the lines now. If I hit code line space 2 and hit return, you can see it advances even further. And now you can see the difference between line spaces. Same thing with the special characters. I can hit code and say the upside down question mark. And now I can ask a question in Spanish. Now, what about erasing? Like if you type something wrong, do you have to start over? Do you have to tear up the page and start your document all over again? Well, no, you don't. This typewriter actually has correction tape in it. And correction tape is a way to actually remove letters from the page so you can correct them. So if I type a sentence, this is a sentence, and I'm going to spell sentence wrong. Sentence. So, oh no, I spelled sentence wrong, what do? Well, I can hit the backspace key until the hammer is over the A, like that, and then I hit this button, correct. So I hit correct, and look at that, it pulls the letter right off the page. Now it didn't do as good of a job as it usually does, there's a little bit of black specks left, but for the most part it removed the letter from the page, and now I can hit the E, and we have now corrected our misspelled sentence. How cool is that? Now how this works is, now the usual typewriter ribbon is basically a felt ribbon that's soaked in ink, and when the hammer hits the ribbon, the ink rubs off onto the page in the shape of the letter. And typewriters that have correction tape that use the usual type of ink ribbon, the correction tape is basically a tape of whiteout. So when you use the correction feature, the hammer hits whiteout over top of the wrong letter. But this thing has a special kind of ribbon in it. It's optional. Both types could be used in this. You could buy the old-fashioned ink-soaked felt ribbon type, but this one has the more higher tech type. And what the ink is, the ink ribbon's actually plastic tape with a special ink coating on it. And when the hammer hammers it onto the page, it actually hammers the entire layer of ink in the shape of that letter onto the page. So when you look at consumed typewriter ribbon of this type, you can see the letters that have been typed. Well, what the correction ribbon is it's a clear it's clear tape. So when it hammers this clear tape, probably has some sort of special coating on it, but when it hammers the clear tape onto the page, the clear tape adheres to the ink that's already on the page and literally tears it off the page, which is pretty sweet. And I'll do it again here. And there you can see it removes the N. Now it has to punch the appropriate letter to properly remove it from the page. How did it know that that was an N? How did it know that that was an E? Well, this thing has digital memory in it, just like a computer. This thing's actually powered by a microcontroller. It's got a Signetics 8-bit Intel 8051 compatible microcontroller in it. And so this thing actually has enough memory to store an entire line of what you've typed into memory. So it knows what you've typed for the last full line. And whenever you hit space or backspace to move the carriage, it knows what letter it's hovering over as a result of that. So I can go all the way back here to the T in this, hit correct, and it removed it. And that's pretty darn cool. That's a very neat feature that you don't get on the old school mechanical typewriters. Now, it gets even cooler though. Let me type another sentence. Another sentence. Now, there's this word eraser here, and it's actually a registered trademark. It's a Smith Corona special feature. Watch what happens when I hit word eraser. Is that not really cool? It removes the entire word. Screwed up an entire word or want to change a word, it'll just remove the entire word. And that's a pretty darn cool feature. Now what's also kind of nice as a result of the sort of memory this thing has, start on a blank line here. If I type yet another sentence, yet another sentence, period, yet another sentence, and let's say I want to remove the word yet. Well, I can hit backspace to get the hammer over the T in yet, hit word eraser. So let's say I've removed a word and but I want to get back to the end of the sentence so I can start a new sentence, but I want to make sure the hammer gets in the exact right place where I left off before I went back to correct a word. Right here on the return key there's a function called relocation. So when you hit code relocation, it will move the carriage back to where you were before you went backwards, remove a word. Now, I don't know if I can do this with my small hands. No, I can't. So, oh, maybe I can. No, I can't. So, I'll hit code relocation, and it beeped, and the carriage moved back to where you were originally, and you can start another sentence. So that's very, very cool. So, other features this thing has, well, take a look at this. You can do subscripts and superscripts. Now obviously the daisy wheel mechanism only has one set of characters on it of one size, so subscripts and superscripts aren't completely properly written where the sub or superscript is smaller than what it's attached to. But otherwise, it works very well. It advances the page just enough to make a proper looking sub or superscript. So if I want to write x squared, I can hit X and press code super, and it advances the page just a little bit. See, just slightly. And now I can hit the 2, and there's your squared. And there we wrote x squared, and that's really cool. And you can do it for subscripts as well. You can go x1, x or x of a, code sub, there, x of a. Very, very cool feature. And unfortunately, the correction feature does not work for superscripts or subscripts. If I roll the page back down to its approximate location here, and I hit correct, see it goes back 1, and then it tried to remove the X, but I didn't have the page in the right place. So it can't remove subscripts or superscripts, but it will remove the primary character that they're associated with. But otherwise, a very cool feature. I don't know where you'd use this, but you have a half space, so if a space is like this, AA, and I do a half space, and hit A, that's a half space, do a full space, and that's an A. So you have half space and full space. Fair enough. So as for other formatting features, you can set the margins. So by default, the margins set, I don't think I mentioned this, there's this scale you can see on the paper bale. It's a scale of characters. Each dot is a character, and it has 2 scales each for 10 and 12 pitch. So you know how many characters long can be fit within the page. By default, the left margin is set to 12, but for some reason the hammer doesn't quite line up with the scale, but it's supposed to be at 12. And then the right margin is, I believe, 75. Either 70 or 75, but this thing has sort of a feature where it'll beep at you 5 characters before the right margin to alert you that you're reaching the end of the page. Mechanical typewriters actually have a mechanical bell in them that goes ding when the carriage reaches the right side of the paper, the end of a line. So you hear the ding, and then you push the lever on the carriage to the right to move the carriage to the right, so that the left side of the paper is under the hammer once again. And that's what this thing does with the beep. So if I just hit the space bar here, there it went beep, and it beeped at 65. So the right margin by default is set to 70. But let's say I wanted to use the entire width of the page for some reason. So I can hit the backspace key here and go back. We'll go all the way to 0, and then I'll hit margin. So that has set the left margin. And then I'll move the carriage all the way to the right, which is at 84, and I'll hit code margin, which sets the right margin. And we're reaching the end of the page here, but you can see the hammer has gotten all the way to the, well, what was the left side of the paper. The paper shifted a bit because it's coming out of the platen here. But now I can move the carriage all the way to the right side. And there you can see it beeped at 79, because 84 minus 5 is 79. So there's that. And my paper is falling out, so I will put it back in. And you don't really need to loosen the platen to put the paper in. You can just stick it in as far as it'll go, and then hit return. Oh, well, it works when you have another hand to hold it, so I guess I'll loosen it. There we go. Alright, we're ready to begin typing again. So to reset the margins, I'll just turn it off and back on, hit a key to discharge the capacitors, and it's back to the default. All non-standard settings you set on this are erased upon turning it off. There is no way of saving any settings you want, no matter how basic. This thing just doesn't do it. You turn it off, it resets everything to default. Oh well. A couple more features I'll show you. You can set tabs here. So if I want to set a tab at 20, I move the carriage to 20, hit tab, and it set a tab there. So now when I hit return, go to a new line, when I hit the tab key, it moves to 20, and I can set up to 8 tabs. Yeah, I can just set tabs wherever I want, and then when I hit tab, it goes to all of them. That's how you set tabs. So of course you have the shift key, one on each side, capital letters, numbers, stuff like that. And then you have this key lock, which we know now in computer terms as caps lock, but in typewriter lingo it's known as shift lock. Because on the old mechanical typewriters, what pressing shift did was it literally shifted the entire mechanism upwards a little bit, so that capital letters, like mechanical typewriters, have individual hammers attached to each key. But each hammer has 2 characters on it. Most hammers have 2 characters on them. One would be a lowercase letter, and then below it, one would be an uppercase letter. So when you hit shift, it shifts the entire mechanism upwards so that the uppercase letters are the ones that'll hit the page when you press a key. So it's known as, this key is known as shift lock, because on the old mechanical writers, you press shift and then you press shift lock, and it would actually mechanically lock the shift key down and keep the mechanism locked. So if I hit lock, there's supposed to be a little light there that lights up, but it doesn't work on this. But if I press the key really hard, you can see it lights up. But now when I type, it types capital letters. But take a look at this. Watch what happens. This is definitely not what happens on a computer. Watch what happens when I press the number keys. It did not print the numbers. It actually printed the shifted characters over the numbers. Because this thing emulates how the old mechanical typewriters worked. With the mechanical typewriters, there was no way of using shift lock while preserving the use of numbers rather than the shifted characters above the numbers. There was no way to do that. There's a way to do that electronically, and that's what computers do, of course, but electric typewriter emulates mechanical typewriters. So that's what this is doing. So very neat. So there's only a couple more features I want to show. First, I'll show Auto Center. Auto Center is a way to be able to type something and have it appear perfectly in the center of the page. No having to do guesswork and moving the carriage to the exact right spot. It does it all for you. So when you hit Code Center, the carriage moves to the center, and watch what happens when I type. I'm going to type the Maritime Girl here. Look at this. The carriage moves backwards with each key I type, and nothing's being typed. Interesting. Now watch what happens when I hit return. And I think I spelled my own channel name wrong. Yes, I did. I missed an M. And yeah, that's how Auto Center works. And well, it's not centered on the page, but it's centered on the margins, which is what it aims to do. So that's how Auto Center works. And after that, it just resumes normal operations. That's a way to type things in the center of a page. Very nice feature. And then finally, auto return. Auto return is really simple. When you reach the end of a line, it automatically advances the page and moves the carriage back to the left. You don't have to hit return, so it's just like a computer. So I'll hit auto return, and it beeps. And now when I type stuff, I'm just going to hit space here. You heard the beep, and then when I hit space again, it automatically advances the page and moves the carriage. Very cool. Now this feature is nicely more intelligent than that, because if you're writing a word while you hear the beep, it won't advance the page until you press space. So it lets you get that last word, even if it goes a little bit past the margin, it lets you get that last word onto it without having to press hyphen and break it onto the next line. See that? It just keeps going. And then when I press space, it advances. And actually, it gets even more intelligent than that. It actually works for the hyphen. So if you're typing a word, and it's a really long word, I guess, and you're like, I don't know if this is gonna fit on the edge of this line without looking stupid, you decide to give up and just use the hyphen. When you press hyphen, it also does a return, advances the page and moves the carriage back to the left. So it even treats the hyphen properly. And now you can finish your hyphenated word. Very, very nice feature on this thing. Very cool. Now there's one more feature I want to show that you wouldn't know exists unless you read the manual, because it's not documented on the unit itself, but it's in the manual. You can change the force with which the hammer strikes the page, thus changing how dark the print appears on the page. There's 3 settings, low, medium, and high. It defaults to medium. If you want to have a lighter strike on the page, slightly fainter print, you press code and L for light. Oops. And I think I just screwed up my margin. I think I accidentally hit margin, but when I hit a letter now, you probably can't tell, but it hits it with slightly lighter force. If I press code M to go back to medium, hit the same letter, and then when I hit code H for heavy and hit the same letter, and if I advance the page here, you might be able to tell, if the video quality is good enough, that the G on the far right is a bit darker than the G on the far left. Very, very cool. So I'll put it back to medium here. Now I'll show you a couple of typewriter tricks. Now, if you're used to a computer, and just reset the unit here. On a computer, you're used to being able to easily use bold, underline, italics, but there are a couple of typewriter tricks to achieve the same effect. Now, there's no way to get italics, obviously. However, you can buy daisy wheels for italic letters. The daisy wheels in these are meant to be user replaceable, and you can buy daisy wheels, or print wheels as Smith Corona calls them, that have different fonts, and I believe there were italic print wheels available as well. So that's a way to get italics. There's no other way to do it though. But there is a way to get bold. Let's say I want to make just one letter bold. I'll do B here, B for bold. I hit B, but then I'm going to hit backspace, and I'm going to hit B again. And I'm going to backspace and hit it again. And I'm going to do that over and over, and that's how I get a bold letter. And now I'll type a single B next to it. And if we advance the page, you can see the B on the left is bold. Very, very nice. What about underline? Well, there's a way to do underline too. You might never have known it, but the original purpose of the underscore was to literally be an underscore on a typewriter. So I'll type underscore. And then I'm going to hit backspace until I get to the beginning of the word. And then I'm just going to type underscores. And ta-da! We have an underscored word. How nice is that? Very, very neat. So that's just a couple of little typewriter tricks that you can use. I didn't even look these up. I just came up with them myself, but I assume that I would assume that just about anybody who's familiar with a typewriter probably knows those tricks. But I think they're pretty cool. So I think that's all the demonstration I wanted to do for this video. Oh, you can clear tabs. I don't know if I said that. The tab set key also works as a tab clear with the code key. You just advance to a tab and then hit code tab set to clear a tab. I think that's all the functionality I wanted to show, so I'll show you inside this thing, or as inside as the user's meant to get. Take our page out here and we'll turn the unit off. And this cover actually flips up, just like that, and it's actually not going to stay up, so I'm just going to remove it, which you can also do. And you have access to the carriage. There's the platen, big rubber cylinder. You can clean it. And I actually put a thin layer of lithium grease on these rails that the carriage rides on. I didn't have to, it was working fine, but I decided just to go ahead and do it. So this is how you change your ribbons. So this typewriter uses Smith Corona Type H ribbons. And that's what the vast majority, if not all, of Smith Corona's electric typewriters and word processors use. Is these H ribbons, and because of that, some people I spoke with wouldn't have guessed this. I spoke with a couple of people who were actually quite a bit older than me, and they didn't think that this was the case. These ribbons, brand new units, are extremely cheap and easy to buy. Smith Corona Type H ribbons and Type H correction ribbons, there's just an enormous stock, new old, I don't know if they're new old stock or if they're still being produced, but either way there is an enormous stock of them, so cheap to buy, like less than 10 bucks for one ribbon, or less than 15 for a set of both the ribbon and the correction ribbon, which is so nice. The ribbons in my unit here came with it, and obviously they're still working, there's still a bit of life left in them. The main ribbon here is most of the way consumed, but I can see that there's still quite a bit left, but it's most of the way consumed. And then I don't know about the correction ribbon, but obviously it's still working. But yeah, super cheap, super easy to buy. There's not multiple sizes, it's just a Type H ribbon and a Type H correction ribbon. But as I mentioned earlier, there are two types of ribbons. Mine has the fancier type with the special ink that can be pulled off the page with the correction tape, and then there's also the old-fashioned ink-soaked felt ribbon that you can get as well, that probably lasts a bit longer, but obviously not as convenient, because to correct it you have to punch whiteout over it. And the typewriters that use these ribbons are actually intelligent. When you buy a particular type of ink ribbon, which in my case is obviously what's called the correctable ribbon, you have to use it with the right type of correction tape, which in my case is not the whiteout ribbon, but just the clear ribbon that pulls the ink off the page. So you need to use a correctable ink ribbon with the correctable correction ribbon, or if you use the old-fashioned ink ribbon, you have to use the old-fashioned whiteout type correction ribbon. And if you mismatch the ink ribbon and the correction ribbon, the typewriter will not work. It'll flash the light if it's still working to let you know that something is wrong, and it's because you've tried to use mismatched ribbons. So it's very nice that the typewriter can alert you to that. Changing these out, super easy. The ink ribbon just pulls off, and there it is. And there you can see, just at the tail end there, or you can see the underscores too. You can see the underscores that we typed. See if I can. Yeah, you can see the underscores and a few letters. So that's the correctable Type H ribbon. Smith Corona. There are third-party companies that make these as well, apparently. Made in the USA. Typewriter itself was made in Singapore. Smith Corona had their own factory in Singapore that they erected in 1973. So it wasn't like it was outsourced. It was Smith Corona's own manufacturing facility. They just decided to place it in Singapore. Probably for the same reason, though. And there's the Type H correction tape, which again just pulls off. And you can see, well, not exactly clear, but almost clear, almost translucent tape that gets punched onto the page, and it pulls the ink off the page. How neat is that? And in there you can see the mechanism. There's a solenoid that drives the hammer, and to change out the daisy wheel you push this little lever that says push, which releases the hammer mechanism, and the daisy wheel pulls right out. And there's your daisy wheel, or print wheel as it's properly called. And this is called the Regency 10 font daisy wheel. And there were a few of them that were available. And if you look here, you can see a mirrored outline of all the characters. And to put that in, you have the identification on the wheel facing you. Just drop it in to the spindle, close it up, put your correction ribbon on first. Make sure to get the tape between the daisy wheel and the metal guide. So right like that. Push it into place, snaps into place on the two reels, and then take your print ribbon, do the same thing, guide the tape between those guides, and push it into place, and it's there. And it's supposed to pivot up like that, which is how it gets the access to the correction tape. So it's all good. And the thing won't operate with the cover off, so I do have to put the cover back on. And I'm going to demonstrate one more feature before I say goodbye for today. An undocumented feature. I just tried random keys. I tried holding random keys down while turning it on just to see if I could find a secret self-test mode. And I did find one. And what you do is, you hold down the enter key, or the return key, excuse me, while turning it on. And watch this. I just turned it off there. It prints every character on the daisy wheel, and it looks like a random order, but that's actually the order they're stamped in on the daisy wheel. They're stamped in this order probably because it was determined that this was an efficient order, so that the print wheel didn't have to be rotated far away for common words and sentences and stuff like that. The characters are just in a logical order, I guess. But yeah, it just prints all of them, and it does it over and over and over until you turn it off. Oh, and it also erases some of them, as you could see, which is kind of interesting. But I think that's all there is to show of the Smith Corona model CXL 4200 electric typewriter from 1988. I think this is a really cool piece of electronicry, a little piece of history. A unit from basically the tail end of when typewriters were still a desirable product. So, really cool machine, I think. Really glad to have it, and in such good condition, and with the documentation and everything. So thank you so much for watching. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one.